In December 1940, sailors of the German Navy boarded the British merchant ship Automedon in the Straits of Java. The boarding party was looking for the merchant navy's code books. It found them. But in a drawer in the chart room, the Germans stumbled across something far more valuable. A top-secret report on British military preparedness in the Far East. This document was to change the course of the Second World War. It was no ordinary ship which had intercepted Automedon. She was one of 10 merchantmen bristling with hidden guns and torpedo tubes. They were ocean raiders, which preyed on unescorted Allied merchant shipping. Over nearly 3 years, these secret raiders played havoc with Allied shipping, from the Indian Ocean to the waters of the Antarctic. They exerted an influence which far outstripped their size and number. To all intents and purposes innocent tramp steamers, the raiders were equipped to find and destroy enemy shipping. Although their captains were ruthless in the execution of their orders, they were notably humane in the treatment of the crews they captured. They were warriors in a secret war conducted in vast expanses of the ocean. A war in which at any moment the tables might be turned on them by the vigilant warships of the Royal Navy. The Royal Navy seemed to hold all the cards. But Admiral Raeder did have some aces up his sleeve. These came in the form of his 3 Panzerschiffe, the pocket battleships Admiral Scheer, Admiral Graf Spee, and Deutschland. Built in the mid-1930s, they were the first major warships to be powered by diesel. Only 3 British battlecruisers were their superiors in both speed and firepower. The pocket battleships posed a serious threat to the shipping lanes on which the British relied to feed and arm themselves. Deutschland and Graf Spee were both in the Atlantic when war broke out. Graf Spee immediately went into action in the South Atlantic and Indian Oceans. Unescorted vessels provided ready targets. By early December, Graf Spee had sunk 9 merchant vessels, but her engines were beginning to give trouble. Graf Spee's commander, Captain Hans Langsdorff, decided to attack shipping off the South American coast before heading back to Germany. But off the mouth of the River Plate, Graf Spee was intercepted by a Royal Navy squadron, consisting of the cruisers Exeter, Ajax, and Achilles. Although totally outgunned, the British ships engaged Graf Spee. Exeter and Ajax were severely damaged, but they harried Graf Spee into taking refuge in Montevideo Harbor in Uruguay. The Uruguayans refused to permit Graf Spee to remain in harbor for more than 72 hours. Adolf Hitler, reluctant to risk defeat at the hands of the heavier British units converging on the Plate, ordered Langsdorff to scuttle his ship. On the 17th of December, Graf Spee, manned by a skeleton crew, sailed into the open sea. It was to be the last and shortest of Graf Spee's cruises. Rather than let the ship and her equipment, which included a top-secret early form of radar, fall into enemy hands, the Germans sank Graf Spee with her own torpedoes rigged to explode in the ammunition magazines after the crew had left. Captain Langsdorff shot himself 3 days later. Germany's 2 battle cruisers, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau roamed the North Atlantic for 2 months in the early part of 1941. Hopes ran high that this time the surface raiders would play havoc with the British convoys. The task of Scharnhorst and Gneisenau was to sever Britain's transatlantic lifeline. But these convoys were more heavily escorted. On the 2 occasions on which the German battlecruisers encountered convoys, they were deterred by the 15-inch guns of the British battleships acting as escorts. However, the German ocean raiders were able to sink 22 unescorted ships, 14 of them in the space of 2 days. Nevertheless, this seemed a poor return for such a huge investment in capital ships and the men who sailed them. Eventually, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau sought refuge in the port of Brest on the Atlantic seaboard of France. Here they became the targets for concerted attacks by British bombers. Could RAF Bomber Command destroy the capital ships in their French lair? Both Scharnhorst and Gneisenau proved remarkably resilient under the British bombs. The attacks looked spectacular from the air, but they did relatively little damage to the German ships. But while they lurked beneath their camouflage netting bottled up in Brest, the battle cruisers were a wasting asset for the Kriegsmarine. On the 12th of February 1942, together with the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen and a swarm of smaller ships, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau broke out of Brest and forged up the English Channel to home waters. The British had anticipated this move, but had assumed that it would be made at night. As it was, thick cloud cover obscured the German ships from attack by heavy bombers and shore batteries. The German force, codenamed Cerberus, made short work of the motor torpedo boats and biplane torpedo bombers which were launched against them. Scharnhorst and Gneisenau reached home waters, but not without sustaining damage from British mines on the last leg of their Channel dash. The crews celebrated, but their raiding days in the Atlantic were now over. Also over was the brief operational career of the battleship Bismarck, launched in February 1939 and commissioned in August 1940. On the 20th of May 1941, flying the flag of Admiral Gunther Lutyens and accompanied by Prinz Eugen, Bismarck left the Baltic for the Atlantic. Their mission was to prey on the British convoy routes, but the Royal Navy was shadowing the 2 German ships. On the 24th of May, they were intercepted by the battleship Prince of Wales and battle cruiser Hood. Concentrated fire from Bismarck and Prinz Eugen sank Hood. But Bismarck's days were numbered. Disabled by torpedo bombers, she was overhauled and pounded to destruction by the battleships Rodney and King George V. It seemed that the future lay with the Kriegsmarine's expanding U-boat arm. A Cinderella service at the beginning of the war, it now represented the most serious threat to Britain's shipping lanes. The U-boats hunted in wolf packs and attacked on the surface by night. In 1941, in 8 months of extended submarine warfare, they sank 1.5 million tons of shipping. Their victims took down with them almost every category of material of which the British stood in dire need: wheat, beef, butter, copper, rubber, explosives, oil, and military equipment. But Admiral Raeder had another trick up his sleeve. During the First World War, the German Navy had employed converted freighters to prey on Allied shipping. The most successful of these ocean predators was the Merwe. During her first cruise in the winter of 1915-16, the Merwe accounted for 14 Allied ships. Some were claimed by Merwe's concealed guns. Others fell victims to the mines the German raider had laid. A year later, Merwe undertook a second cruise. Disguised as a neutral Swedish vessel, she sorted into the Atlantic. She used her guns to force vessels to heave to, and then sent a boarding party to take possession of the ship. Sometimes the ship was scuttled and her crew taken on board. If the cargo was useful, the vessel was sent back to Germany with a prize crew. Although Merwe accounted for 25 ships, a far greater menace was represented by German U-boats. Early in 1915, the Germans launched a campaign of unrestricted submarine warfare. This meant that merchant vessels would now be attacked without warning. The aim was to deter neutral ships from entering British waters. To counter the U-boats, the British developed their own form of secret warfare. Merchant vessels were fitted out with camouflaged armament. Some of them operated from the Irish port of Queenstown, now Cove, and they became known as Q-ships. The usual U-boat tactic was to sink merchantmen with its guns, since it carried only a small number of torpedoes and preferred to conserve these for attacks on warships. Because the U-boat had to surface to make its kill, it was exposed to attack by the Q-ships' concealed guns. Q-ships patrolled the Eastern Atlantic, North Sea, and Mediterranean. These top-secret ships were manned by Royal Navy crews disguised as merchant seamen. Some Q-ships, masquerading as fishing boats, escorted the trawler fleets, which played a vital role in feeding the population of Britain. Having bowed to American pressure to abandon their unrestricted U-boat campaign, the Germans resumed it in 1917. The rate of sinking soared, forcing the introduction of the convoy system. Sometimes escorting Q-ships acted in concert with a British submarine, literally towing it along with a telephone line linking the two vessels. When a U-boat was spotted on the surface, the submarine dived to attack with torpedoes. At the beginning of the Second World War, Admiral Raeder recalled the successes of Germany's secret raiders. Over 20 years later, they were to sail again. Eventually, 10 merchantmen were disguised to resemble Allied or neutral ships, packed with guns and torpedoes and given free rein to roam far and wide in search of their prey. Storage space was at a premium on these ships. Extra rubber lifeboats were needed for their large crews, and tons of paint and structural materials to effect disguises. The decks had to be stiffened to carry the weight of concealed heavy weapons. The Raider Penguin mounted a 75mm gun in her bow. Her main armament was 6 105mm guns, backed up with 4 20mm guns, twin 37mm guns, and torpedo tubes. Penguin, designated HK-33, sailed from Germany on the 22nd of June 1940. the very day that the Battle of France ended in French surrender. Commanded by Captain Felix Kruder, she had orders to operate in the Indian Ocean, off Australia, and in Antarctica. On the 31st of July, off Ascension Island, the Penguin sank her first ship, the British vessel Domingo de Larrinaga. The merchantman's crew was taken on board. Steaming into the Indian Ocean, Penguin sank a Norwegian tanker. On the 12th of September, Captain Kruder watched as torpedoes sent another ship to the bottom. By now, the Royal Navy was mounting extensive air searches for the German commerce raider. Undeterred, Captain Kruder headed for the waters of Australia. Off the eastern coast of Australia, and further south off Tasmania, Penguin began to lay mines. It was not long before they claimed a victim, the merchantman Rayville, the first American ship to be sunk in the Second World War. The Royal Navy was now taking steps to safeguard merchant shipping in the Indian Ocean. Convoys were introduced, escorted by the small numbers of warships available for such duties. One such ship was the heavy cruiser HMS Cornwall, on convoy duty in the Indian Ocean. The hunt for the Penguin was a frustrating one. Penguin was now pushing into the ice floes of Antarctica. Her target was the Norwegian whaling fleet, operating in these waters. Kruder anticipated no resistance. The whalers were unarmed. Penguin cut a swathe through the whaling fleet. Soon Kruder had amassed his own fleet of 14 whalers. Their captains went quietly. But unknown to the commander of Penguin, British codebreakers at Bletchley Park were drawing a net around his commerce raider. In the huts which filled the grounds of Bletchley Park, British cryptanalysts had broken the Enigma code used by the German armed services. Messages were encrypted on Enigma machines before being broadcast in Morse and decrypted by a second Enigma machine at the receiving end. The Germans believed that the Enigma code was unbreakable. The fiendishly complicated inner workings of the Enigma machine ensured that any letter encrypted on it would not be repeated for another 150 million depressions of the typewriter key. But the British had unlocked Enigma's secrets, and by the end of the war were reading thousands of Enigma signals in real time. The code breakers at Bletchley were able to exploit broken Enigma codes to locate and sink the supply vessels on which the Penguin and her sister ships depended. The narrow corridors of Bletchley were thousands of miles from the waters of the Antarctic, but they were bound together by a thread of decoded information, the vital strand in the secret war fought by the code breakers. Although he was aware of increased British air patrols and more heavily escorted convoys, Kruder decided to return to the warmer waters of the Indian Ocean. The Antarctic foray had proved a profitable interlude for Penguin, but her whaling days were over. But not before the Penguin and her flotilla of captured whalers made a rendezvous with the German pocket battleship Admiral Scheer. It was a high point in the cruise of the Penguin. The ships passed so close to each other that the men were able to wave and exchange greetings. One member of Penguin's crew later recalled that it was like a school reunion. Penguin's spotter plane went quickly into action. On the 25th of April 1941, Penguin located the 6,800-ton Empire Light en route from Madras in India to the South African port of Durban. Empire Light was swiftly sent to the bottom. On the 7th of May, Penguin's seaplane spotted a tanker near the entrance to the Persian Gulf. Captain Cruder moved in for the kill. But before the tanker was abandoned to her fate, a distress signal had been transmitted which was picked up by the British cruiser Cornwall. The Royal Navy had finally got a fix on the elusive Penguin. At last, after months of fruitless patrolling, Cornwall's crew scented possible success. Cornwall made all speed to intercept Penguin, which was about 500 miles due north. The Walrus was launched. Cornwall's crew were convinced that at last they were about to get to grips with the enemy. The two ships were on a collision course. Penguin's track snaked towards the Horn of Africa. It was here that she was to be cornered by Cornwall. Penguin was now masquerading as the freighter Tamerlane. But a check revealed that Tamerlane was not on the list of ships which Cornwall might expect to meet in this area. The Walrus picked up Penguin some 60 miles west of the cruiser's position. Penguin's crew knew that a British warship would not be far behind. The interception and challenge was made. Penguin's reply did not satisfy the cruiser's captain. Knowing that he could not escape, Cruder hoisted his battle ensign and uncovered his guns. Penguin's guns opened up. The British cruiser returned fire. A fierce duel ensued. But Cornwall's superior firepower began to make itself felt. Cruder gave the order to abandon ship. He refused to leave his blazing command while the rescue operation continued. Penguin's crew and their prisoners, both equally shaken, were taken aboard Cornwall. The gallant Cruder chose to go down with his ship. One of Penguin's sister ships was the Atlantis, a former 8,000-tonner of the German Hansa line. Housings on her decks concealed Atlantis's guns. Like Penguin, Atlantis's principal hunting grounds were in the waters of the Indian Ocean and in the South Atlantic. Her commander, Captain Bernhard Rogge, treated his prisoners well. The cruise of the Atlantis was to have a profound effect on the situation in the Far East. The base at Singapore the linchpin of British defences in the Far East, was threatened by the Japanese expansion into French Indochina. The bases the Japanese acquired there in 1940 after the fall of France placed Singapore under direct threat. On the face of it, the British hold on Singapore seemed secure. It was well garrisoned by troops who had a low opinion of the Japanese armed forces. To most observers, it seemed inconceivable that in the event of war between the Japanese and the Japanese would prevail. But the British were operating from a position of weakness. Their ground forces in Malaya had no tanks. Air defences consisted of a small number of obsolete Brewster Buffaloes. Even more worrying was the loss of Britain's French ally. After the fall of France, the Royal Navy had attacked the most important elements of the French battle fleet lying in the naval base of Mers el Kebir in Algeria. It was deemed vital to deny these powerful warships to the Kriegsmarine. But the assault, however necessary it might have seemed to the British, left a legacy of bitterness and removed a vital defence component from the Far East. Britain's ability to project naval power on a global scale was seriously weakened. The Royal Navy was now severely overstretched. It no longer had the capability to fight a European and Atlantic war and to make provision for the gathering conflict in the Far East. Something had to give. In July 1940, the British Chiefs of Staff drew up an extremely gloomy report on the Far East. It concluded that the British position in the region was too weak to risk a war with Japan, even if the Japanese controlled French Indochina or neighbouring Thailand. In August 1940, the War Cabinet agreed to send the top-secret 28-page report to the Commander-in-Chief in the Far East. Amazingly, it was entrusted to a civilian vessel, the blue funnel steamer Automedon. On the 24th of September, she sailed for the Malayan port of Penang. Automedon never got there. In the Straits of Java, she encountered Atlantis. Stan Hugill was one of Automedon's crew.
Went on deck at 8 o'clock with my wheel, so I goes to the wheel. And at about 20 past, we spotted away over the port a rather big vessel, which we thought was a Dutchman, because we were near the Dutch East Indies, heading for Penang, and we were off the island of Sumatra, Achin Head, actually. And when we saw this ship coming, the old man, he's walking up and down the poop, up and down the bridge, said to the second mate, who was on his watch, said, "I think she's a Dutchman, sir."
But it was Atlantis, whose captain was preparing to attack. The distance between the two ships narrowed. Then Atlantis revealed her true colours.
Next minute, bang, over the bow. We had the warning shot. Up went the German battle flag. Oh, that was it. The old man then said to me, "Hard a starboard." So I put the wheel over hard a starboard, you see. Now that meant the ship's bow went that way and her stern went that way. Next minute, we were at right angles to this, which was eventually the raider. We didn't know at the time, we thought she was a Dutchman. Next minute, bang, bang, bang. Because our captain was of the stuff that Nelson's made of, you know, they don't exist anymore, people like this. We'll fight them, you know, and turn this pea shooter towards this chap. He blows out the water in no time. Three volleys of three each. Bang, 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 bang. And by the time he finished, all this area was gone. All the boats on the boat deck was gone. But round me, the captain, as far as I could see, was blown to bits, virtually. We had 2 second mates, an auxiliary second mate, as well as the other chap, the main second mate. They were killed.
Automedon was dead in the water. Silence descended on the ship, broken only by the sound of escaping steam. The freighter and her secret cargo were now at the mercy of Atlantis. Captain Rogger gave the order to board the British ship.
They were here in no time. The boarding parties came aboard. Right, they had pistols, they had grenades and cutlasses. And they came aboard in no time. Oh, the Dirks, as they call them in the German Navy. And they came aboard in no time.
The boarding party was in a hurry.
And they were aboard, rifling everywhere. They went right through the ship.
One of the German officers had a specific task: to hunt for secret materials. Automedon lay in a busy shipping lane, and time was of the essence. The officer located the strongroom. Plastic explosive did the rest. The Germans had blown their way into a treasure trove of secret information. Fleet orders, gunnery instructions, intelligence reports from MI6, and quantities of merchant navy codebooks. But there was one more discovery to be made. Back in the shattered chart room, the German officer discovered the weighted canvas bag containing the Chiefs of Staff report on Singapore. Orders had been to throw it overboard in the event of an emergency, but the officers responsible for it were dead. Now it was in enemy hands. Shortly afterwards, Automedon was sunk. It had been a good day's work for Captain Rogger and his crew. Captain Rogger saw the significance of the Chiefs of Staff report and secured its swift delivery to Japan. In Tokyo, the German naval attaché, Rear Admiral Paul Wernicke, handed it over to the Japanese Navy's Chief of Staff, Admiral Kondo. Wernicke's diary recorded the sensational impact on Japanese strategy made by the report seized from Automedon. Kondo told me how valuable the information contained in the War Cabinet memorandum was to the Imperial Navy, such as a significant weakening of the British Empire which could not have been identified from outward appearances. The report had a decisive impact on Japanese strategy. Admiral Yamamoto, commander of the combined Japanese fleet, now decided that he could deal a double blow against the British and the Americans in the Far East. On the 7th of January 1941, Yamamoto wrote to his Navy minister that if the US Navy could be destroyed in a decisive battle, the scattered British and Dutch forces south of the Philippines would be unable to mount an effective resistance to a Japanese onslaught. Detailed planning went ahead for the destruction of the US Pacific Fleet in its Hawaiian base at Pearl Harbor. The die was now cast for the war in the Pacific. In London, the Admiralty was quickly informed of the loss of secret material from the strongroom of Automedon. But astonishingly, the Admiralty seems to have assumed that the Chiefs of Staff report had been thrown overboard. Orders were issued for the changing of the merchant navy codes, but fatally, nothing else was done. The British remained unaware that the interception of Automedon had set in train events which were to lead to one of their country's greatest military defeats. A year later, on the 15th of February 1942, the Japanese took the surrender of the British garrison at Singapore. It was an unprecedented humiliation. During the course of the Second World War, Emperor Hirohito of Japan decorated only 3 Germans with samurai swords. One went to Hermann Goering, Hitler's deputy Führer and chief of the Luftwaffe. The second went to Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox and commander of the Afrika Korps. The third was awarded to Bernhard Rogge, the commander of the ocean raider Atlantis. But the cruise of Atlantis was not yet over. Returning to Germany, Captain Rogge claimed his 22nd and last victim, the Norwegian ship Silver Plana, on the 10th of September 1941. Atlantis had rounded Cape Horn and was now off the west coast of Africa, where she was to rendezvous with a U-boat to take on fuel. The operation seemed to be going smoothly. Then, on the horizon, appeared the British heavy cruiser Devonshire. The U-boat immediately crash-dived, leaving a telltale oil slick on the water. Devonshire opened fire on Atlantis. Rogge and his crew set time charges and abandoned ship. One of Atlantis's magazines blew up and she went down. Devonshire's captain made off, fearing the presence of a submarine. Eventually, the U-boat resurfaced to pick up the survivors from Atlantis. They were now faced with a perplexing problem of logistics. The U-boat took on Rogge's wounded and irreplaceable specialists. The rest were crammed on the deck or towed behind the U-boat in Atlantis's lifeboats. Three days later, the U-boat was met by the German supply ship Python. Another transfer was begun. But before it could be completed, a second British cruiser arrived on the scene. This was Dorsetshire, famous for having delivered the torpedo coup de grace to Bismarck. Python was fired on and then scuttled. Joined by the survivors of Python, the men of Atlantis were cast on the mercy of U-boats summoned to the sea. They were joined by Italian submarines, and the strange convoy headed for the port of Saint-Nazaire on France's Atlantic seaboard. The Germans who saw the interiors of the Italian submarines were amazed by the degree of luxury to which their officers were accustomed. By the end of December, after a 5,000-mile journey, a total of 8 submarines had delivered all the survivors to Saint-Nazaire. The relief was palpable. The men of Atlantis then went to Saint-Nazaire's cathedral, where they gave thanks for their deliverance after 655 days at sea. Next stop was Berlin, and a formal reception held for the crew of Atlantis by Admiral Raeder. Raeder presented Rogge's men with a special clasp to mark their incredible journey. Germany's secret ocean raiders had left their mark on naval history, but it was the U-boats which brought the Battle of the Atlantic to a climax in the summer of 1943. The U-boats came within an ace of snatching victory before they were overcome by the superior material and technical resources deployed by the Allies. Two years later, the war was drawing to a close as the Red Army fought its way through the ruins of Berlin. in the chaos of defeat, the exploits of the ocean raiders were all but forgotten. The red flag was raised over the Reichstag. And in the aftermath of the German surrender, a U-boat sailed up the Thames under a white ensign. The last of Germany's ocean raiders had been sunk by a US submarine in November 1943. In 3.5 years of highly unconventional warfare, the ocean raiders had sunk nearly 1 million tons of Allied shipping, including the Australian cruiser Sydney. In doing so, their crews had diverted vital Allied warships from the life and death struggle with the U-boats in the Atlantic. And those crews fought a war which one of their British prisoners described as showing a damn good bit of gallantry and chivalry. 6 of the ocean raiders were sunk in action. And one of them, Atlantis, played a pivotal part in unleashing the war in the Pacific. The German officers searching Automedon could hardly have expected to find a document of such crucial strategic importance tucked away in a weighted bag in the steamer's chart room. It was one of the crucial steps in the road to war in the Far East. And it also played a part in the single most disastrous military defeat in the history of the British Empire. But perhaps most extraordinary of all was the final voyage undertaken by the men of Atlantis, one of the epic feats of rescue and endurance on the high seas.